Hi everyone, we've had a question regarding how to choose the correct whip. First, you need to know what the rules are for your sport. In the dressage, we can have a whip no longer than 120 centimeters. So I keep a piece of tape on one of my shelving units, and I can pick up any of my whips, set them on the ground, and they should be under that piece of tape. This is an older whip that's been living in my horse trailer, and the lash of the whip is a little bit into my tape. So I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and cut the end of the whip so that it is underneath that piece of tape. This is now going to pass my whip and bit check at the end of a test to make sure that it's not too long. Something to look for with your whip is what the end of your whip is looking like. As these whips get older and fray at the end from use or improper storage, what can happen is the cloth at the end can start to wear away, and we end up with a situation like this one that I pulled out of the garbage at a horse show. The cloth is completely gone and the inside of the whip is exposed. Most of these whips have fiberglass on the inside, and these can actually create shards that can go under the horse's skin when you use the whip. So anytime you have an exposed end on your whip, this should just be thrown away. Whips are not so expensive that you should continue to use a whip like this and possibly put your horse in harm. So we talk about the proper care of the whips. My stash of whips I have sitting over here are all sitting handles on the ground, lash up. The reason for this is that when you store a whip with the handle up and the lash on the ground, is you're putting a stress point on the end of the whip by bending this lash and having the weight of the whip on it, and that's going to make your whip not last nearly as long. You probably question, why do I have so many whips? I have more than this. This is just what I grabbed for all of you to see. Well, this is where that whip selection comes into play. We have our whips that we want to be regulation length, 120 centimeters or shorter. That's a length that is going to be able to reach behind your saddle pad if you have a full-size pad. If you have a pony, you might want something a little bit shorter. This is a whip that was custom made for me by a student many years ago. I hold it near and dear to my heart. If I see you borrow this whip, I will take it from you. Privilege lost. It's the perfect balance. I love how it feels in my hand. I have a brow band that she made that matches the exact same beading on this whip. It's a fabulous whip. However, when this whip was made, our whip rule was for a much shorter whip, and so the lash of this whip is way down here. It tends to not reach the end of a full-size saddle pad, and I end up tapping the pad, or worse, I have to actually take my hand and reach backward if I want to touch the horse with the whip. So I only use this whip now if I have a horse that is in a cob or pony size saddle pad, because then I know it will touch the horse so that I can tickle them with the lash or give them a little sharper tap with it if they're really not listening to my aids. We also have much longer whips. This is one that you can see it's as tall as I am. I'm pretty short. I'm just a little 5'2"-ish. So this whip is about my height. This is a great whip for working with horses in hand, working with the piaffe and the passage. This is my favorite whip to carry for that work with the horses. I like the balance of it. I like the length of it. If I have a horse that's a little bit questionable with touching with the whip and I it's not a horse I get to work with all the time to make them better with the whip. I feel like I have enough distance from them that if I were to touch them and they got offended, I would still be in a safe position until we can get the horse more accustomed to touching from the ground with the whip. And then I have kind of an in-between whip. These ones are a little too long for competition. They're nearly the same whip, but their lashes are all of the way up here. It's a good, I don't know, centimeters. It's almost 5 inches longer than a legal competition whip. I like these when I'm riding and I'm working on piaffe and passage because they're a little longer. I can touch a hock, I can touch a stifle, and I don't have to move my arm out of position to be able to use one of these whips to reach a little bit farther down on the horse. These whips are actually quite old. My whips tend to last a really long time. One of the reasons is I don't let people borrow my whips. So when we talk about that whip selection, right now we've just pretty much talked about length and the health of the whip. We also have whips that have sentimental value. This whip, it can't be replaced. We have whips that we've won at horse shows. Those ones can't be replaced. We have ones that we have been using for the last 4 Grand Prix horses. Even though these are still on the shelf, this whip just can't be replaced. So we tend to hold our favorite whips kind of close to ourselves, trainers do. This in-hand whip is a $150 whip, and I can't find them anymore. I've looked all over the place. I cannot find this whip. It does not exist any longer. So it's also not replaceable. So if you don't have a whip, and I can't even keep this in my pile with it being broken, if you don't have a whip and you need to get one, the first thing I would suggest is find a whip that's under 120 centimeters so that you'll be legal for U.S. dressage. And then from there, think about the balance of the whip in your hand. One of the reasons I like this particular whip, the handle's falling apart, it's been stepped on, but the lash is still very healthy. It's very comfortable in my hand. It's light. It's easy to carry. And what I like about it is this whip is stiff. It doesn't accidentally wiggle around and touch the sensitive horses. So I have to deliberately touch the horse with this whip. And then that way I don't feel like I'm going to spook those more sensitive horses like my horse. It also can be sharp enough on a really dull horse if I'm having a problem getting a horse to listen to my leg. This one is still sharp enough that if I give them a good swing with it, it's going to make a little, it kind of feels like when you flick someone, it makes a little zinger to it, and it makes them listen to the leg so that they'll go more forward for you. I have one whip that is really, this one is really bendy. It's super soft, bendy whip. I don't use this on a really sensitive horse. I don't use this whip very much at all. But I know a lot of people that do like this whip on a duller horse because they can give a swing and it doesn't have resistance to them, and they can give that good flick of the wrist, and the whip kind of bends backwards and then comes around again. And so a rider with carpal tunnel or arthritis, one that's really bendy, is good for them because they don't have to put as much effort into using the whip to get a lot of stinger out of it. That being said, I don't like to really sting them with the whip. If they're not good riding to my leg and I would have to like wallop them with the whip, like something that you would hear on the other side of the arena, that horse needs to be worked from the ground and learn to understand going forward from a cluck. I don't ever want to have to hit a horse that hard. I think of the whip as being like an extension of my leg. I need to touch you a little farther back. So maybe when I bring my leg back and you don't listen, I'm going to touch you right behind my leg and say, hey, over here, honey, you need to listen to this leg. If they're not going forward enough, I might come a little bit more back on the haunches with the whip to give them an idea of a push from behind. I'll usually cluck when I do that because I understand a cluck from the ground means move on. I might touch them right on top of the croup. I don't use that a lot. A lot of horses tend to lift up when you touch them on the top of the croup. Some are good about lowering when you touch them there, so that's a time I might touch them on the top of the croup. I don't ever use the whip for sending a horse sideways. For me, it's always move ahead. If they're not moving sideways, it's a connection issue, controlling where the shoulder is and how they're responding to the hand. I think I covered a lot more than whip selection. So, to review, to choose a whip under 120 centimeters, comfortable weight in your hand, well balanced for you, sensitive horse, a stiffer whip, a rider with some difficulties with their hand or wrist, a little more whippy whip will do. One other thing to think about, in the show ring, I tend to go with a dark whip, something that's not going to really stand out a lot. I saw someone at the last show that had, their whip was kind of like gold. It was really bright. It was sparkly. There wasn't any gold on their outfit at all, and the whip just stuck out like a sore thumb. And every time they used the whip, you could see them just tap and tap and tap and tap, and it actually was distracting. So be mindful of your colors with your whip choices. Like I have one sparkly handle. I don't show in this whip. This is one that I use at home, and then I have the one that was made for me that matches the brow band, but it's not sparkly, so I don't really feel like that one's too distracting. I did show in it when it was, that was the length that we were allowed. Now that it's gone back to 120, I go with these longer ones. If you guys have any questions, you can leave them down in the messages. You can send me a private message or an email. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, although I think I covered more than what was planned. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'd be happy to talk with y'all. Have a great day.